Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Coping with Crisis series. We are looking at how to deal with hurt, and this is our fourth segment in this series on dealing with hurt and how to process that and how to get beyond that and get some healing in it. And so in this episode, the fourth episode, we want to look specifically about when we file a grievance, when something bad has happened to us. Many of us, like we talked about, have things that happened to us in our past that were grievous, that were bad, that hurt us, that caused us pain, and maybe causing us pain now. But we need to be healed from that. We need to process that in a biblical way so we can have forgiveness and release any bitterness, any resentment or anger we might have, and that we can move on and grieve and get past it. So I've been mentioning through this series the idea of that when something happens to us, we file a grievance. And it's like filing a grievance at a business where you file a grievance at the HR department and we want some action to rectify the situation because we have had our rights violated or something happened to us at work, so we file a grievance. Well, that's what we kind of do with pain, but we file that grievance and there's no HR department per se. And so we just carry along with us these grievances, these grievance stories that we call it, and we continue to hold these grievance stories. And anyone that has a grievance story typically has a hard time forgiving. They have a lot of bitterness and anger, and they hold this grievance until they think that something will be done in the future. And what they're looking for, they're probably never going to get until they're on the other side. But anyway, how do we let go of these grievances? How do we let go of these grievance stories and move on to forgiveness and getting free from all of this? A grievance story explains to people and ourselves why our lives hasn't went the way we wanted it to. How our lives were disrupted by people hurting us, how our life has not worked out the way we wanted it. And so we have this grievance that we file against a person who we believe stopped our lives, or maybe just life in general didn't treat us fair because of the fall, or sometimes we even blame God for the grievances we have. And so it's a story that explains that we have been treated in an unjust way, that it disrupted our lives and prevented us from having the kind of life that we wanted to have. So we put together a little narrative, a grievance story about how wrong we were treated by these people. We select a few things that prove how bad they were. We leave out other certain details of the story about us and what we contributed to it, and we select certain content that we only want shared, and then we end up sometimes monsterizing the person, making them the worst person on the planet. There's nothing good in them. And don't get me wrong, there are people that are monsters. They did bad things, and that is a certain percentage, is a smaller percentage. But for the majority of cases, 90% of the cases, most people are dealing with another human being that's not a monster, that has good aspects and bad aspects in them. And but again, in their grievance narrative, the person is nothing but a monster. There's no good qualities whatsoever in their grievance stories. And that's why it's very difficult for them to forgive, because the person's a monster. You don't have to forgive monsters. Monsters are not forgiven because they're not human. And so that's what happens in our psychological makeup, is that we can create in them something that is not human. And if they're not human, then we don't have to treat them as human. Once we go down this path of creating a grievance story, then at that point, we either are going to make ourselves out to be a hero in the story, or we're going to make ourselves the victim of the story. It's one of the two, but you'll pick one or the other. Those who are offended, the ones who had the thing done to them, the pain done to them, in a grievance story, They typically avoid responsibility for what they contributed to the problem. And they tend to think that the person was intentionally trying to hurt them many times. Like I said, in some certain percentages, the person is trying to intentionally hurt the person. I get it. But in other situations, it's because the person has character flaws and relational deficits that cause them to treat other people wrongly. But anyway, in a grievance story, there is an avoidance of responsibility. So for instance, you'll have a grievance story where someone leaves their spouse, okay? For instance, they leave their spouse and they move on or whatever. They divorce them or whatnot. Well, what they won't talk about, they'll say, hey, isn't it awful that my husband or my wife just left me for no reason and can't believe they would do such a thing and woe is me, poor me. But they never will talk to you about, well, what did you do to contribute to a bad marriage? So obviously they left you for a reason. They won't talk about how cold they were. They won't talk about how their relational deficits played into this. And they won't talk about how they iced the other person and actually wanted them out of the house and wanted them to leave. And so in order to keep the high moral ground, so they could say they're the victim, they iced the person until the person couldn't take it anymore, and then eventually left. That happens so frequently that one spouse will treat the other one so bad, but they don't want to lose the high moral ground. They'll treat them bad, and then that forces the other person to say, you know what, I can't take this anymore, and they leave. And so the one who leaves gets the blame, but no one blames the person who's still in the home because they don't know what that person's been up to all these years. And so in a grievance story, that person is always made to be the victim and are never responsible for what happened. Now, in certain cases, and I always reserve this out, the person had no clue, they weren't responsible. Somebody cheated on their spouse and they took off, and that's why they did it. And they had their own issues. But again, those are the rare cases, and they do happen. But for the majority of cases, people share in responsibility of what happened. And that's what a grievance story doesn't create. It doesn't create responsibility. It creates avoidance of responsibility. And then also about this idea of intentionality. We talked about it last time about how we have to balance between the personal and the impersonal. So in a grievance story, everything is personal, and everything that the person did to them is intentional, that this person had it out for me. They set me up. They were going to destroy me. That's what the whole point of this was. They married me to destroy me. And I mean, it's that kind of thinking. And so they don't see not only their responsibility in the situation, but they don't understand the intentionality that many, many times the person is not intending to hurt them, but because of their own issues and the dynamic that's going on, they do get hurt. They hurt other people, and so. But a lot of times they don't mean to do that. They have character flaws. They have deficits in their makeup that cause them to do things like that. And so a lot of times it's not 100% intentional. If you want to put a percentage on it, maybe it's 50% intentional and 50% unintentional. You know what I mean? So you have to weigh that out. You have to know the difference between 100% intentionality and a certain percentage of intentionality. And that's what a grievance story doesn't do. It doesn't allow for a percentage of intentionality. It only allows for 100% intentionality. That person was bent on destroying me. And again, like I said, it happens in rare cases, but most of the time, the person is not intentionally trying to hurt them to whatever percentage that might be. If you have a grievance story, the hallmark of it is that you will tell other people about it. And you will do it constantly. And this constant telling of the story indicates that that you and I have not been healed if we're continuing to repeat this story in the edited version that makes us either the hero or victim. And when you retell this over and over again, you might even feel the emotions of it. You might feel the pain of it. It might make you angry and sad and depressed and hurt all over again. You might physically react to it every time you say the same story to somebody. It causes a physical reaction in you. Oh, that's a grievance story. But here's what I want to do in this time that we have talking about grievance stories. Let's take a test to see if you and I have a grievance story. Let's go through a few diagnostics and see whether or not we're holding on to something. Okay, so number one, have you told your story more than twice to the same person? Okay, I have people that come to me, not in counseling, but just, I talk to them when I see them and whatnot. And every time I talk to them, they bring up the same issues again. They bring up the same story again. And every time I talk to them, I hear it. And I know it's a grievance story. And they don't realize they're doing it, but they're repeating themselves. And it's because of this grievance story. So the question you and I have to answer is, do we keep saying our story over and over again to the same person or persons? Second diagnostic question is, do you keep replaying the events that happened to you in your head over and over again? It could be monthly, could be weekly, it could be daily. But is it a frequent thought in your head that you keep replaying the pain and the hurt that this person or people did to you? It's a good sign, if it's happening, that you have a grievance story. A third diagnostic question. Do you actually speak to the person who hurt you even when that person is not there? Like, for instance, you're having a conversation with this person and the person's not even in the room. The person may not even be alive. The person might be on the other side of the country. But you're still having a conversation with them as if they were sitting right there. Or you're driving in your car and you're having a conversation with them. Maybe you're telling them how you feel. Maybe you're cussing them out. Maybe you're doing this, that, or whatever. But you're having a full-blown conversation and the person's not even there. Or you're pretending to have a conversation and this is the things you would like to say to them, right? Tell them off, whatever. If you're doing that, you have a grievance story then. That's a grievance narrative. Another diagnostic is this. Have you ever said to yourself that you're going to tell your story without getting upset? And then when you tell your story, you find yourself in an emotional breakdown again. You start crying, you get angry, you start getting agitated physically, you start shaking, whatever it might be. Have you done that? That could be a sign that you have a grievance story. Another diagnostic. Is the person who hurt you the villain of the story? Because in these narratives, you're either the hero or the victim, and then in the story there's a villain. And so is this person the villain? Do you see them as the monster? And so you have to answer that one. Another diagnostic is this. When you tell your grievance story, does it bring to your mind all the other painful things that have happened to you in your life? Because see, what we do is we put things in categories. We have certain pain categories. And we put this certain pain here and that certain pain here and that pain here. And so when we talk about this grievance story, it elicits a certain pain inside of us and reminds us of all the other painful things we've put in that category. And so we just get flooded with everything in that category that has ever happened to us. And so it brings back a lot of painful things, even from other sources of things that caused us pain. Is it doing that? That's a grievance story. Another diagnostic. Does your story focus primarily on your pain and what you have lost? Is it just focused on your pain and what you lost? If it is, that's a grievance story. Another diagnostic. Have you said that you will never tell your story again, but you keep doing it? Again, shows another grievance story. You see, what ends up happening with a lot of people is misery loves company. The person with a grievance story will start searching out for others who went through the same problems that maybe you and I did. And then we start swapping stories with each other. And that's not sometimes why certain groups that people get into are not healthy. There are good support groups and there are bad support groups. And the good support groups actually try to get healing for people, but bad support groups sit there and they swap stories, and that's all they do. They swap grievance stories, and that's all they do. It doesn't go anywhere from that. So that's another thing. Are you seeking out others to swap grievance stories with? And if you're doing that, that's wrong as well. It's one thing you got to understand, it's one thing to tell people you were hurt. That's okay to do. But a grievance story, as you can see, is way different. You can say honestly what happened to you, but a grievance story, as you can tell, is modified. It relieves you of responsibility. There's a villain or a monster that must be stopped, and you're the victim or the hero. I mean, it's a fantasy. It's really what it is. So that's different than telling someone I was hurt, like going to a counselor or a support group. I was hurt. That's different. That's totally different. And let me give you another diagnostic. Has your story stayed the same over time, or has it been modified in which the story has now become inaccurate, that it's been embellished, that it's been overstated, overextended? And again, you would only know this, but if the story has changed and it is modified to make you more of the hero, more of the victim, and the person more of the monster, then you know you have a grievance story at this point. So a grievance story is, again, something you tell people over and over and over again. This is not you just telling you were hurt. It's a story that doesn't balance the impersonal and the personal aspects of it. It's a story that doesn't allow the victim to take responsibility for what they either contributed to the problem or the responsibility to get the help so they can heal. It's a story that keeps a person as a perpetual victim, and it's a story that doesn't allow the person to forgive and move on. And so in the next time we look at hurt being done to us, we're going to move into this other area of, well, how do I release this, grievance story and move on to the path of forgiveness, okay? So join us next time as we deal with how we deal with hurt in our Coping with Crisis series. God bless you. We'll see you next time.